The Texas sun has a way of holding you, wrapping its warm, heavy arms around your shoulders like an old friend who knows you're leaving and doesn't want to let go. Standing on the porch of the yellow ranch-style house that had been my entire world for 40 years, I felt that heat soaking into my bones one last time. The for sale sign that had been planted in the front yard for 2 months was gone, replaced by the stark reality of empty rooms and echoing hallways. I wasn't just packing cardboard boxes. I was folding up the fabric of my entire life, taping it shut and shipping it off to a storage unit in Lubbock so I could become something else. I was no longer Martha, the widow who grew the best tomatoes in the county and drove a beat-up Ford pickup. I was about to become Grandma, the live-in help, the useful mother. "You're sure about this, Martha?" Sarah asked, leaning against the doorframe, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. We had been neighbors since before our hair turned gray, and she was the only one brave enough to ask the question that had been keeping me awake at night. New York City is a different beast. And Jason. Well, honey, Jason hasn't been back here since the funeral. People change when they go up north. I tightened the tape on the last box, the screeching sound cutting through the humid afternoon air. "He needs me, Sarah," I said, trying to inject a confidence into my voice that I didn't entirely feel. "They both work so hard." Jason said childcare costs a fortune in the city, and with the new baby, they're drowning. How can I say no? He's my son. Besides, I want to know my grandson. I don't want to be a face on a screen that he sees once a year at Christmas. The hardest part hadn't been selling the house. It was selling the truck. My 2015 Ford F-150, affectionately named Bessie, was my independence. Watching the young man from the next town over count out the cash and drive Bessie away felt like amputating a limb. I was trading my freedom for a plane ticket to JFK, convinced that the sacrifice was the ultimate form of love. I looked at my suitcase standing lonely by the door. 2 bags allowed, 50 pounds each. That was the weight limit of my old life that I was permitted to bring into my new one. The flight was a blur of nervous energy. I spent the 4 hours clutching a framed photograph of Jason I had taken when he was 10 years old, grinning with a missing front tooth. I tried to overlay that image onto the man he had become, the busy executive who called me once a month for 5 minutes. I told myself that once I was there, once I was helping with little William, the old Jason would come back. We would be a family again. But when the plane landed at JFK, the assault on my senses was immediate. The noise was a physical weight, a cacophony of shouting and honking. I dragged my heavy suitcases off the carousel and scanned the crowd of faces at the arrivals gate. I saw families hugging, tears of reunion, and signs with colorful marker scribbles. And then I saw him. Jason was standing off to the side, looking at his phone. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my truck had sold for, his hair cut in a sharp, severe style. He looked older, harder. The soft edges of the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee were gone. "Jason," I called out, waving my hand, my heart leaping. He looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly, and tucked his phone into his pocket. He didn't smile. He checked his watch before walking toward me. There was no open-armed embrace, no crushing hug. Instead, he gave me a quick, one-armed squeeze, his body stiff, pulling away almost before he had made contact. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice dry. He immediately looked down at my luggage. 2 large floral-patterned suitcases and a cardboard box tied with twine containing my slow cooker. "Is this all of it?" "Jesus, Mom, you brought half of Texas with you. We don't have space for clutter in the apartment." Emily hates clutter. The joy that had been bubbling in my chest fizzled out, replaced by a cold knot. "It's just my clothes and a few things for the kitchen, Jason. I thought maybe I could make." "Yeah, we'll see," he cut me off, grabbing the handle of one suitcase with a sigh of irritation. "The car is double parked. We have to move fast. The traffic is a nightmare today, and Emily hates it when I'm late for the baby's schedule." The drive into Manhattan was mostly silent. When the car finally pulled up to their building, I had to crane my neck back just to see the top of it. It was a glass needle piercing the sky, cold and imposing. We took the elevator up to the 42nd floor, my ears popping as we ascended. Jason unlocked the door and pushed it open. "Shoes off," he hissed before I could even cross the threshold. Immediately. We don't track outside filth in here. I fumbled with my laces, nearly losing my balance. I placed my worn sneakers next to his polished Italian loafers and stepped inside in my socks. The apartment was breathtaking, in the same way a glacier is breathtaking. Beautiful, majestic, and completely devoid of warmth. The living room was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. But everything was white. The sofa was a pristine, creamy white. The rugs were white. The walls were a pale, icy gray. The kitchen surfaces gleamed with stainless steel and marble so polished I could see the reflection of my own tired, wrinkled face looking back at me. There were no family photos on the walls, no knickknacks, no sign that human beings actually lived here, let alone a baby. It felt like a showroom or a laboratory where a speck of dust would be treated as a biohazard. Where should I put my things? I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the cavernous space. I clutched my purse to my chest, suddenly conscious of my faded denim jacket. The guest area is down the hall, past the nursery, Jason said, checking his watch again. Don't wheel the suitcases on the hardwood. Carry them. You don't want to scratch the finish. Emily will lose her mind if she sees a scratch. He didn't offer to help. I lifted the heavy suitcase, my joints protesting, and began the long walk down the pristine white hallway. I didn't know it then, but I was walking into a prison of my own making, a high-rise cage where my love would be weaponized against me. I reached the door of the small room that was to be mine, and for the first time since leaving Texas, I felt a profound, terrifying loneliness. The sun didn't reach in here. The air was recycled, cool, and filtered. I set my bag down on the narrow bed and looked out the window at the concrete jungle below, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. I had barely set my suitcase down on the floor of the small room I thought was mine when I heard the click of heels on the hardwood. I turned to see Emily standing in the doorway. She was a striking woman, sharp-angled and polished, wearing a silk blouse that looked like it shouldn't be touched by human hands. There was no smile, no "welcome to New York," no "how was your flight?" Instead, she extended a hand, not to shake mine, but to offer me a thick, spiral-bound document with a laminated cover. "Hello, Martha," she said, her voice cool and professional, as if she were addressing a new intern rather than her mother-in-law. "Jason said you're eager to start. We appreciate the help, but we need to make sure we are all on the same page. William is on a very strict developmental schedule." She tapped the cover of the booklet. "This is the protocol. Please memorize it by tomorrow morning." I took the book, its weight surprising me. On the cover, in bold, sans serif font, it read, "Rules for Living and Caring for Baby William." I opened it, my eyes widening as I scanned the table of contents. It wasn't just a list of emergency numbers or feeding times. It was a 5-page legalistic dossier governing every minute of my existence in their home. "You'll see the schedule on page 2, Emily continued, walking past me to adjust a blind that was already perfectly straight. "The day begins at 5 a.m. That's when the bottles need to be sterilized and the first batch of almond milk prepared. William wakes at 5:30. The day concludes at 9 p.m. after the final cleanup. We value efficiency here." 5 in the morning, I asked, a nervous chuckle escaping my throat. "Emily, honey, I'm used to early mornings on the farm, but 16 hours a day is a bit much for me." "It's what the baby needs," she cut me off, her eyes flashing. "Consistency is key to cognitive development." And regarding the living arrangements, she gestured vaguely toward the living room. "We've decided to convert the spare room into a sensory deprivation space for William's nap training. You'll be sleeping on the sofa. It's a designer piece, very comfortable. You just need to make sure all bedding is folded away and hidden by 4:45 a.m. We don't want the apartment looking like a dormitory." My heart sank. I looked at the sleek white leather sofa in the middle of the open-plan living room. I would have no door to close, no 4 walls to call my own. I was to be a ghost in the machine, visible only when working, invisible when resting. "And Martha," she added, pointing to the kitchen, "we run a strictly vegan household. No meat, no dairy, no animal byproducts. I know you're used to heavier foods in Texas, but we don't allow those toxins here. The smell lingers in the fabrics." I thought of the frozen steaks I had foolishly hoped to cook for Jason, of the comfort of a warm beef stew. Not even a little milk for my coffee. Almond or oat only, she said firmly. And no coffee after noon. It affects your cortisol levels, and babies can sense stress. That night, lying on the leather sofa that squeaked every time I breathed, I tried to find a comfortable position. The city lights bled through the sheer curtains, casting long, prison bar shadows across the floor. I felt exposed, like an exhibit in a museum after hours. I reached for my phone to check the time, and that's when I saw it. A small red light blinking in the corner of the ceiling, nestled between the smoke detector and the recessed lighting. I sat up, clutching the thin blanket to my chest, and scanned the room. There was another one above the kitchen island, another in the hallway. They were cameras. I felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I was being watched. I was sleeping in a room with a camera pointed directly at me. It wasn't just security, it was surveillance. I was the subject of an experiment I hadn't consented to. The next few days blurred into a gray haze of exhaustion and paranoia. The schedule was brutal. Up at 5 o'clock, scrubbing, sterilizing, mashing organic avocados, folding laundry in precise geometric shapes that Emily demanded. But the worst part wasn't the work. It was the voice. One afternoon, my back aching from 3 hours of tummy time supervision on the hardwood floor, I sat down on the edge of the armchairs for a moment. I just needed to close my eyes. I let my head tip back, exhaling a long, shaky breath. Suddenly, a voice boomed from the ceiling, making me jump so hard I nearly knocked over a vase. "Martha, you're disengaging." I spun around looking for Emily, but the apartment was empty. It was the speaker system. It was Emily's voice, crisp and distorted by the technology, coming from the camera above the TV. "One. I was just resting my eyes for a minute, Emily," I stammered to the empty room, feeling foolish and terrified. "William is awake in his crib," the voice from the ceiling continued, relentless. "He needs visual stimulation. If you're tired, drink some green tea. Resting on the furniture during active hours is against the protocol on page 4. Please stand up." I stood up, my legs trembling. Tears of humiliation pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back, knowing she could see them. I walked to the crib, forcing a smile for my grandson, feeling the camera lens burning a hole in the back of my neck. A few days later, trying to inject some warmth into the sterile silence, I played a little George Strait on my phone while I was folding the endless pile of white onesies. I hummed along, swaying a little, remembering the dances at the VFW hall back home. "Martha?" The voice cut through the music like a knife. "Turn that off." I froze. "It's just a little music, Emily. I thought it might be nice for the baby to hear some." "It's overstimulating," the voice snapped, "and the lyrics are culturally regressive. We play only Mozart or white noise for William. Please adhere to the playlist I shared with you. No more country music. It's not the atmosphere we want to cultivate." I turned off the phone, the silence rushing back in, heavier than before. I looked at the camera, that unblinking mechanical eye, and realized with a sinking dread that I wasn't just a helper. I was a prisoner in a high-tech panopticon, stripped of my diet, my sleep, my privacy, and even my music. I was an employee who paid to be here, working a shift that never ended, under the gaze of a big brother who called me Mom only when there was an audience. I learned to live with the unblinking eyes in the ceiling. After that day with the music, I didn't pack my bags. I shrank. I learned to suppress the humming, to walk softly on the hardwood, and to become exactly the invisible machine Emily wanted me to be. The shock of those early days eventually dulled into a numbing routine, a gray loop of servitude where I convinced myself that endurance was the highest form of love. I told myself that if I just worked harder, if I was just quieter, eventually I would earn my place in their family. 2 years passed like this. 730 days of waking up at 5 a.m. 730 days of sterilizing bottles, folding laundry into perfect squares, and living under the unblinking gaze of the cameras that studded the ceiling like glass eyes. In all that time, I hadn't taken a single day off. I hadn't seen a Broadway show, hadn't walked in Central Park without pushing a stroller, hadn't eaten a meal that wasn't a rushed assembly of leftovers consumed while standing over the kitchen sink. I had become a fixture in the apartment, as functional and overlooked as the dishwasher. But then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. It was Linda, my oldest friend from Texas. Her voice, thick with the drawl I missed so desperately, sounded like rain falling on a parched field. She was in the city for a niece's wedding and wanted to see me. Just coffee. Just a few hours on Sunday morning to hold hands and remember who we used to be. The joy that surged through me was so intense it was almost painful, followed immediately by a suffocating wave of guilt. Sunday morning arrived with a tension that seemed to vibrate in the air. I had prepared everything in advance. The baby's bottles were lined up like soldiers on the counter. The organic vegetable mash was prepped in glass containers, and the apartment was spotless. Jason and Emily were sitting at the dining table, scrolling through their tablets while eating the acai bowls I had prepared. I wiped my hands on my apron, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I took a deep breath, telling myself I was a grown woman, not a child asking for permission to leave the table. Jason, Emily, I started, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to keep it steady. I have a small request. My friend Linda is in town from Lubbock. We haven't seen each other since the funeral. I was hoping. Well, I was wondering if I could take a few hours off this morning. Just from 9 to 1. I've done all the prep work for William. You wouldn't even notice I was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. Emily slowly lowered her spoon into her bowl, the clink of metal against ceramic sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. She didn't look at me immediately. She looked at Jason, then at her watch, and finally she turned her gaze on me. It wasn't a look of confusion. It was a look of pure, unadulterated outrage. Leave. Emily repeated the word as if it were a foreign concept, something distasteful on her tongue. You want to leave. Today. Martha, it's Sunday. Sunday is our family reset day. We need you here to manage William so Jason and I can review our portfolio and plan the week. You know the schedule. I know, Emily, I pleaded softly, wringing my hands. But it's just 4 hours. I haven't taken a break in 2 years. Not one. I just want to have a cup of coffee with a friend. Emily stood up, her chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. The polished veneer of professionalism she usually wore cracked, revealing a raw, ugly entitlement beneath. A break. You want a break. Her voice rose, shrill and piercing. Do you have any idea how much we do for you? We flew you here. We put a roof over your head in one of the most expensive zip codes in the world. We feed you. We pay for your utilities. And you think you can just clock out whenever you feel like socializing? You are living here for free, Martha. You are essentially a dependent in this household. And now you have the audacity to demand me time, like you're some kind of union worker? The words hit me like physical blows. Dependent. Living for free. I thought of the 16-hour days, the nights spent soothing a crying baby so they could sleep, the cleaning, the cooking, the absolute surrender of my autonomy. I looked at Jason. He was sitting there, staring intently at his coffee cup, his shoulders hunched. He heard every word. He heard his wife call his mother a burden, a freeloader. Jason, I whispered, my voice breaking. Son, please. It's Linda. You remember Linda. She used to bake you cookies. Jason didn't look up. He didn't meet my eyes. He just took a sip of his coffee, his silence a louder endorsement of his wife's cruelty than any words could have been. In that moment, the image of the little boy with the catfish dissolved completely, replaced by this spineless stranger in a designer t-shirt. Emily wasn't finished. She walked around the table, pointing a manicured finger toward the front door. If you are so desperate to gossip with your friend, go ahead, she spat, her face twisted with a chilling sneer. But listen to me closely, Martha. If you walk out that door today, don't bother coming back. You think you have it hard here. Go see how you survive in New York City with no money and no skills. See how far you get. Or maybe you'd prefer we put you in one of those state-run nursing homes. I'm sure they'll give you plenty of breaks there, right between the bed sores and the cafeteria slop. The threat hung in the air, toxic and heavy. The nursing home. the ultimate weapon used to terrify the elderly. She wasn't just threatening my housing. She was threatening my dignity, my very existence. She looked at me with triumph, expecting tears, expecting begging. She expected the grandmother who had sold her truck and her home to crumble and apologize for her selfishness. But something strange happened. The tears didn't come. The fear that had ruled me for 2 years, the fear of disappointing them, the fear of losing access to my grandson, suddenly evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I looked at Emily, really looked at her, and saw not a successful woman, but a bully. I looked at Jason and saw a coward. And I looked at myself, reflected in the stainless steel refrigerator, and decided I was done being their victim. "I see," I said. My voice surprised me. It was calm, flat, devoid of the trembling that had been there just minutes ago. "I understand perfectly." I didn't argue. I didn't point out that I had saved them over $100,000 in nanny fees. I didn't mention the sacrifice of my home. Arguments are for people who still hope to be heard, and I had lost that hope. I didn't go to the door. I didn't go to meet Linda. Instead, I turned around and walked back toward the living room. "Good," Emily huffed, sitting back down and picking up her spoon, satisfied that she had crushed the rebellion. "I'm glad you're being reasonable. Now, William needs changing." I walked past the baby, past the cameras, and into the small corner where my suitcase was still tucked away. I didn't touch the baby. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't go to Linda, but I didn't stay with them either. Not really. The Martha they knew, the one who sought their approval, had walked out that door. The woman sitting on the sofa was someone else entirely, someone who was starting to do the math. I looked at the camera lens in the corner of the ceiling, and for the first time, I didn't feel watched. I felt like a witness gathering evidence. The silence in the apartment changed after that Sunday. Before, it had been the heavy, suffocating silence of my own submission. But now, it felt charged, like the quiet hum of a machine powering up. To Jason and Emily, I was simply the defeated old woman who had learned her place, a chastised servant who was finally adhering to the protocol without complaint. I moved through the rooms with my head down, scrubbing the marble countertops and sterilizing the bottles with mechanical precision. But behind my lowered eyes, my mind was racing. The heartbreak that had nearly crushed me had crystallized into something sharp and cold. I wasn't just a mother or a grandmother anymore. I was an observer. And for the first time in 2 years, I began to see my life not as a family tragedy, but as a legal case file. I waited until Emily left for her spin class and Jason was on a conference call in his soundproofed office. I went to the kitchen drawer where Emily kept the household manuals and pulled out the spiral-bound booklet she had given me on my first day, Rules for Living and Caring for Baby William. I had hated this book, despised its condescending tone and rigid micromanagement. But now, holding it in my trembling hands, I realized it was my greatest weapon. It wasn't just a guide. It was a contract of control. I took it to my corner of the living room and, using the old smartphone Linda had taught me how to use properly, I photographed every single page. I captured the timestamps required for feedings, the strict prohibition of leisure time, the mandated cleaning chemicals, and the penalty system for non-compliance. Then, I put the book back exactly where I found it, ensuring the edges aligned perfectly with the drawer divider, just as Emily liked. Next came the digital trail. I spent my nights, under the cover of the blanket on the sofa, scrolling back through 2 years of text messages and emails. The volume was staggering. Emily didn't just ask for favors. She issued orders. "Clock in, Martha. The baby is awake." Sent at 4:58 a.m. "You missed the dust on the baseboards. Redo it before you sleep." Sent at 10:15 p.m. "No lunch break today. The schedule is tight." Sent at noon. I screenshot every single one of them, saving them to a cloud folder Linda had helped me set up remotely. I also found the performance reviews Emily had emailed Jason, detailing my deficiencies and areas for improvement, like I was a corporate asset rather than a human being. But the most damning piece of evidence was my own memory. I bought a small black notebook from the bodega downstairs when I was sent out to buy almond milk, and I began to reconstruct my hours. I sat there late at night, the city lights casting long shadows across the page, writing down the reality of my existence. Monday, 5 a.m. start, 9:30 p.m. end, 16. 5 hours. Break, 15 minutes to eat, standing up. Tuesday, 4:45 a.m. start, baby sick, 10 p.m. end, 17. 25 hours. As I wrote the numbers down, seeing the ink fill page after page, the true scale of the exploitation hit me. I wasn't helping out. I was working 2 full-time jobs, back-to-back, 7 days a week, for $0. 2 days later, I told Emily I needed to go to the pharmacy for her migraine medication. It was the only errands she trusted me with. I left the apartment, but instead of going to the usual CVS on the corner, I hailed a cab, something I had never done alone in New York, and gave the driver an address in Midtown. My hands were sweating as I clutched my purse, which contained the notebook and the phone. Linda, despite being back in Texas, had come through for me. She had a cousin who worked as a paralegal in the city, and he had set up a consultation with Mr. Samuel, a labor attorney known for taking on difficult cases. Mr. Samuel's office was nothing like the cold, sterile penthouse I lived in. It was cluttered with stacks of paper, smelled of old coffee and mahogany, and felt undeniably real. Mr. Samuel himself was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a suit that looked like it had seen better days. But when he listened, he had the intensity of a hawk. I sat across from him, recounting my story, expecting him to tell me I was just an emotional old woman, that family disputes didn't belong in a law firm. I showed him the photos of the rulebook. I showed him the texts. I slid the black notebook across the desk. He flipped through the rulebook first, his eyebrows shooting up as he read the section on mandatory wake-up times. Then he looked at the texts. Finally, he closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, a look of disbelief on his face. "Mrs. Richter," he said, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose, "let me explain something to you about the law in this country. There's a very specific test we use to determine if someone is an independent contractor, a volunteer, or an employee. It all comes down to one word: control." "Control?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Exactly," he said, leaning forward, his voice firm and authoritative. "If you were just a grandma helping out, you would decide when you hold the baby, when you cook, and when you rest. But this," he tapped the photo of the rulebook, "this is not help. This is an instruction manual for a servant. They control your hours. They provide the tools. They dictate the specific methods of your work. They monitor you with cameras to ensure compliance. In the eyes of the law, specifically the Fair Labor Standards Act, you are an employee. And based on what you've told me, you are a non-exempt domestic worker." He pulled out a calculator and started punching in numbers, muttering to himself. New York State minimum wage, overtime multiplier after 40 hours, liquidated damages for willful violation, spread of hours pay. The clicking of the keys was the only sound in the room. Finally, he looked up, writing a figure on a legal pad and turning it around for me to see. "You worked for 2 years. That's 104 weeks. You were never paid a cent. You were never given a mandated break. You were threatened with eviction if you didn't comply." I looked at the number on the pad. It was a number so large, I couldn't comprehend it. It looked like a phone number. "But they are my family," I stammered, the old guilt flaring up one last time. "Can I really sue my own son?" Mr. Samuel looked at me with a softness I hadn't expected. "Mrs. Richter, looking at these texts, at the way they threatened you with a nursing home, they didn't treat you like family. They treated you like a machine. And in New York, the law protects workers from wage theft, regardless of who the employer is. You aren't suing for a gift. You are suing for the wages you earned with your sweat and your time. This isn't revenge. It's justice." He pushed a retainer agreement across the desk. "If we file this, it's going to be a war. They will deny everything. They will say you were a guest. But this book," he tapped the rule book again, "this book is a confession signed by your daughter-in-law. It proves they were the employers from day one." So, Martha, the question isn't whether we have a case. The question is, are you ready to stand up and demand What is yours? I thought of the camera blinking in the corner of the room. I thought of Emily's sneer when she told me I had no skills. I thought of Jason's silence. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake this time. "I'm ready," I said, and I signed my name. I had checked into a modest hotel 3 blocks from Mr. Samuel's office, a place with worn carpets and a humming ice machine. But to me, it felt like a palace. For the first time in 2 years, I woke up without an alarm. I made coffee, real coffee, with dairy creamer, and sat by the window watching the city wake up below me. I wasn't rushing to sterilize bottles or mash avocados. I was simply waiting. I knew exactly what was happening across town at the penthouse. Mr. Samuel had timed the service of the lawsuit perfectly. 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, right when Emily would be issuing her morning directives and Jason would be rushing to put on his tie. I wasn't there to see it, but I could imagine the scene with cinematic clarity. The doorbell ringing, cutting through the chaos of the morning routine. Emily likely shouting for me to get it, only to remember I was gone, then barking at Jason. The confusion when they saw a stranger standing there, not with a delivery of organic diapers, but with a thick manila envelope stamped with the seal of the New York State Supreme Court. I imagined Jason tearing it open, his eyes scanning the cover page. Martha Richter versus Jason and Emily Richter. I imagined the silence that would descend on that sterile white kitchen as they read the demands. Unpaid back wages for 24 months, overtime compensation calculated at 112 hours per week, liquidated damages for willful violation of state labor laws, and legal fees. The total sum at the bottom of the page was bold and undeniable: $252,400. My phone rang at 7:45 a.m. The screen flashed Jason, but when I answered, it was Emily's voice that assaulted my ear, shrill and trembling with a rage so intense, it sounded like she was choking. "Have you lost your mind?" she screamed, the sound distorting through the speaker. "We just got served legal papers. You're suing us. We are your family. We took you in. We gave you a home. And this is how you repay us. By trying to bankrupt us with some insane extortion scheme." I took a sip of my coffee, letting the warmth settle in my chest. "Hello, Emily," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "I haven't lost my mind. On the contrary, I think I've finally found it. You're a greedy, ungrateful old woman," she spat. "We're going to fight this. We'll countersue you for rent. We'll sue you for emotional distress. You won't get a dime, and you'll never see William again." "You can try," I replied, my tone hardening. "But remember what you said to me last Sunday. You called me a dependent. You called me a freeloader." "You were wrong. I wasn't a dependent. I was a domestic worker. And you. You were a terrible employer. You didn't pay me, you didn't give me breaks, and you created a hostile work environment. Now it's simply time to pay the bill." I hung up before she could respond. My hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally speaking the truth. 2 weeks later, the air in the mediation room was so cold, it reminded me of the apartment. We sat on opposite sides of a long, polished mahogany table. Jason looked pale, his eyes rimmed with red, refusing to look at me. Emily sat rigid, her face a mask of haughty indignation, dressed in a sharp power suit as if she were attending a board meeting. Next to them sat their lawyer, Mr. Sterling, a man with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's be realistic here," Mr. Sterling began, tossing the lawsuit onto the table with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "This is a family dispute that has gotten out of hand. Mrs. Richter is a grandmother. Grandmothers help out. That's what they do. To characterize her love and care as employment is not only legally tenuous, it's morally offensive. There was no contract. There was no expectation of payment. This was a voluntary arrangement based on familial affection. Mr. Samuel, sitting beside me, didn't say a word. He simply reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single object, the spiral-bound booklet with the laminated cover. He slid it across the table. It spun slowly and came to a stop right in front of Mr. Sterling. "If this was a voluntary arrangement based on affection," Mr. Samuel said calmly, "then can you explain this? This is a 5-page rulebook, drafted and signed by your client, Mrs. Richter. Please turn to page 3, section 4, Employee Conduct and Schedule. Note the use of the word employee. Note the penalties for taking unauthorized breaks. Note the specific instructions on chemical usage and the mandatory uniform guidelines. Mr. Sterling picked up the book. As he flipped through the pages, his confident smile began to falter. He paused at the page where Emily had highlighted the 5 a.m. start time in neon yellow. And Mr. Samuel continued, pressing a button on his laptop, "If that isn't enough, let's look at the digital environment." He turned the screen toward them. It played a compilation of the clips I had recorded. Emily's voice boomed from the speakers, distorted and commanding. "Martha, you are disengaging. Stand up. It is against protocol to sit during active hours." The silence in the conference room was deafening. Jason put his head in his hands. Emily went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked at her lawyer, expecting him to fight back, to pull some legal trick out of his sleeve. But Mr. Sterling didn't fight. He closed the rulebook slowly and took off his glasses. He looked at Emily with a mixture of disbelief and professional annoyance. "Mrs. Richter," he said to Emily, his voice low but audible to everyone in the room, "you didn't tell me about the rulebook or the cameras. It was for the baby's safety." Emily hissed. "No," Mr. Sterling corrected her, shaking his head. "This isn't safety. In the eyes of the New York Department of Labor, this is a confession. You micromanaged her hours, her methods, and her physical movements. You threatened her housing if she didn't comply. You looked at this isn't a grandmother helping out. It looks like modern slavery." He turned, "If this goes to court, a jury will destroy you. They won't just make you pay the back wages. They will make an example out of you. The reputational damage alone will end your careers." "So, what are you saying?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. "I'm saying," Mr. Sterling said, pushing the settlement papers toward them, "that you need to pay your mother. Every single cent she's asking for." I looked at Jason. He finally lifted his head and met my gaze. I searched for the boy I had raised, for a glimmer of apology, but all I saw was fear. Fear for his bank account. Fear for his lifestyle. I realized then that the trial wasn't just about money. It was about breaking the chain of abuse. I wasn't just winning a lawsuit. I was teaching them the lesson I should have taught them 2 years ago, that love is a gift, but labor has a price. The check arrived at Mr. Samuel's office 3 days after the mediation, a slip of paper that carried the weight of 2 years of lost life. It was a cashier's check for the full amount, minus the legal fees, but the number was still staggering. I held it in my hands, tracing the zeros with a thumb that was no longer chapped from scrubbing bottles, and felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. I knew exactly what it had cost them to write this. They hadn't just dipped into a savings account, they had bled. Through Mr. Samuel, I learned that they had been forced to liquidate a significant portion of their stock portfolio and take out a personal loan to cover the difference. They had no choice. Emily worked as a director of human resources for a major fashion label. Her entire career was built on the enforcement of labor standards and corporate compliance. If a lawsuit accusing her of wage theft, exploitation, and creating a hostile work environment had gone to public record, if the rulebook had been leaked to the press, she would have been fired before lunch. They paid not because they felt remorse, but because they felt fear. They paid to buy my silence, but in doing so, they inadvertently bought my freedom. I didn't stay in New York to watch the fallout. I didn't need to. The city that had once felt like a prison now felt simply like a crowded room I was happy to leave. But news travels, even across state lines and oceans, especially when you make friends with the people who actually run the buildings. Henry, the doorman who had always given me a sympathetic smile when I hauled groceries into the elevator, sent me a long email a few weeks later. His update confirmed what I had suspected. Jason and Emily were discovering the true market value of the services I had provided for free. According to Henry, the transition was a disaster. Once I was gone, the rulebook became a source of comedy for the agencies they tried to hire from. The first nanny, a stern woman with 20 years of experience named Mrs. Higgins, lasted exactly 3 days. Henry wrote that he saw her storming out of the lobby on a Thursday afternoon, dragging her suitcase and muttering loudly enough for the concierge to hear, I am a child care provider, not a prison warden, and I certainly don't scrub floors for people who check the baseboards with a white glove. Desperate, they hired a second nanny, a young woman named Sarah, who knew exactly what her time was worth. She didn't accept a flat weekly rate like the grandmother had. She demanded $35 an hour, with time and a half for anything over 40 hours, and double time for weekends. And she had boundaries that were made of steel. When Emily tried to hand her the cleaning supplies to scrub the bathroom while the baby slept, Sarah simply laughed and pointed to her contract. Light housekeeping related to the child only, she had said. If you want a housekeeper, hire a housekeeper. That's another $30 an hour. The pristine white laboratory of an apartment began to crumble. Henry described seeing Jason coming home late, carrying bags of greasy takeout because there was no one there to cook organic vegan meals from scratch. He described hearing shouting matches echoing into the hallway, arguments about whose turn it was to sterilize the bottles, whose turn it was to wake up at 3 a.m., whose turn it was to pay the exorbitant agency fees that were draining the salary Jason had once spent on designer suits. They were drowning in the very tasks they had deemed unskilled labor when I was doing them. They were learning, the hard way, that the help was actually the glue that had held their entire fragile existence together. But I wasn't thinking about their dirty floors or their empty bank accounts. I was thinking about the color blue. Not the cold gray blue of the New York skyline, but the vibrant turquoise blue of the Pacific Ocean stretching out before me. I lay back on a cushioned lounge chair on the sands of Waikiki Beach, the Hawaiian sun warming my skin in a way that felt healing rather than oppressive. The air smelled of salt and plumeria, a stark contrast to the exhaust fumes and bleach that had filled my lungs for 2 years. To my right, on a small teak table, sat a Mai Tai with a little paper umbrella and a slice of fresh pineapple. I took a sip, the sweetness of the rum and juice dancing on my tongue. I had used a portion of the settlement money to book this trip. A grandmother's honeymoon, I called it. A honeymoon with myself. I had rented a beautiful condo with a view of Diamond Head. I was taking hula lessons on Tuesdays, and for the first time in decades, I answered to no one. My phone, lying next to the drink, buzzed against the wood. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. It was a text message from Jason. "Mom, please, we need to talk. The new nanny is costing us a fortune, and she won't work past 6 p.m. Emily is on the verge of a breakdown. We miss you. We know we made mistakes. Can we just start over? William misses his grandma." I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over. A year ago, that message would have broken me. A year ago, the mention of William would have had me packing my bags, ready to rush back into the fire to save them. But as I read it now, under the shade of a palm tree, I saw it for what it was. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission of love. It was a job offer. They didn't miss me. They missed the free labor. They missed the convenience. They missed the silence of a woman who made their lives easy at the expense of her own. I looked at the ocean, watching the waves roll in, endless and powerful. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who thought sacrifice was the only currency of love. That woman had stayed in New York. The woman in Hawaii knew better. I didn't type a reply. I didn't feel anger, and I didn't feel guilt. I just felt a profound sense of closure. I pressed the power button on the side of the phone and held it down until the screen went black. I placed the silent, dark device back on the table, picked up my cocktail, and slid my sunglasses down over my eyes. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about what time I had to wake up tomorrow. I took a deep breath, tasting the freedom in the air, and smiled. I was retired. And the view was spectacular.